Welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a packed program for you today. A little bit later in the program, our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez is going to be joining us to talk about a popular tourist attraction that draws birders from all across the world and how it soon may have a giant piece of border wall running through it. So we'll speak with her in just a little bit. And our Julian Resendiz will tell us about what's essentially an annual pilgrimage for thousands of people living here in America across the border as we enter Semana Santa, or Holy Week, as it's known in English. But first, let's start today's program by taking a look at what's trending across the border. Now, for the first time in U.S. history, a president has attended the oral arguments at the Supreme Court. President Donald Trump was on hand as the justices heard the arguments on whether his executive order to ban birthright citizenship is legal. That's something we've been talking about all week. Now, it appears the high court seems geared towards actually rejecting those claims. This morning, conservative and liberal justices questioned whether Trump's order declaring that children born to parents who are in the United States illegally or temporarily are not American citizens comports whether either the Constitution or federal law. Our Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley has the latest.
And while the president was inside the Supreme Court, he only stayed long enough to hear the government's position. He left before the opposing side presented its case. The president's motorcade arrived at the court earlier this morning, just before arguments began. Today's case stems from an executive order the president signed on the first day of his second term. That order said children born to parents who were in the country illegally are not entitled to automatic U.S. citizenship. The citizenship restrictions are part of the president's broader immigration crackdown, but so far they've not yet taken effect anywhere in the country after being blocked by several courts. For years, it's been established in settled law that anyone born in the United States or its major territories is automatically granted U.S. citizenship, with narrow exceptions, say for the children of foreign diplomats working in the U.S. The White House argues the law should not extend to children born to people who enter the U.S. illegally. Today, both sides are laying out their arguments to the justices.
Unrestricted birthright citizenship contradicts the practice of the overwhelming majority of modern nations. It demeans the priceless and profound gift of American citizenship. It operates as a powerful pull factor for illegal immigration and rewards illegal aliens who not only violate the immigration laws, but also jump in front of those who follow the rules.
Ask any American what our citizenship rule is, and they'll tell you. Everyone born here is a citizen alike. That rule was enshrined in the 14th Amendment to put it out of the reach of any government official to destroy.
And while arguments are playing out today, a final ruling isn't expected until later this spring or early summer. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley, WGN News.
Now, Chief Justice John Roberts suggested that Solicitor General D. John Sauer, who we heard from a moment ago, who was representing the administration in the case, was relying on quirky exceptions to citizenship to make a broad argument about people who are in the country illegally. Roberts said, quote, "I'm not quite sure how you can get to that big group from such tiny and sort of idiosyncratic examples." Justice Clarence Thomas sounded the most likely among the 9 justices to side with the president's executive order. The Trump administration admitted in a court filing last week that it had erroneously relied on an ICE memo to justify arrests at immigration courthouses. The details are part of an ongoing federal case brought by groups seeking to block the courthouse arrests. Federal prosecutors said they had used the memo titled 2025 ICE Guidance to defend the Trump administration's deployment of ICE agents at courthouses, which led to numerous arrests of immigrants attending hearings, which we have reported on here several times on Border Report Live and, of course, on borderreport.com. To read more about those stories, you can go into borderreport.com and type ICE arrests courthouse in the search bar. Now, federal prosecutors, or rather NBC News reports, the memo indicated that ICE officers or agents may conduct civil immigration enforcement actions in or near courthouses when they have credible information that a targeted person would be present at a specific location. But the Justice Department said in the court filing, the memo does not and has never applied to civil immigration enforcement actions in or near immigration courts. The Department of Homeland Security did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Immigrant rights groups that brought the case said the implications of the Justice Department's disclosure are far-reaching. All along the U.S.-Mexico border, visitors from both countries are visiting the neighboring country as part of Holy Week, or as we call it down here in the valley and all across the border, Semana Santa. On South Padre Island in far south Texas, Mexican nationals from Monterrey and surrounding cities travel to the region of the state to enjoy a few days at the beach and some shopping. Business owners on the island say they look forward to the increase in business each Easter holiday. Will Everett, who owns a local coffee shop on the island, says things really pick up right before Good Friday, and many visitors stay past Easter Sunday and into the next week.
We had an awesome spring break this year, and Semana Santa is always kind of like the small hurricane that comes through after the big hurricane. But we love our Mexican visitors, and I think this year we're going to get way more than we had before.
Thousands of Mexican nationals will visit the island this week. Our Salvador Rivera tells us in San Diego, Mexican nationals always visit Coronado, California, which is a peninsula in San Diego County for the Easter holiday. And over in El Paso, Americans actually travel south to Mexico during Semana Santa. Our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz joins us now to talk more for that side of our coverage. How are you doing today, Julian?
Hi, Rudy. Good to be back. As we saw from the images that you just displayed, the northbound traffic of people during Holy Week is mostly for shopping, mostly for having fun. Not just in El Paso, not just in Arizona, but also in South Texas. A lot of people travel south into Mexico, and that's a little different story. You don't see as much joy as you see the concern, and the concerns stem over safety. When Mexicans come over to visit relatives in the U.S., they are not watching out for vehicles that suddenly cut them off on the freeway, or they don't have a reason to really fear for their safety. The same cannot be said south of the border. And we're not just the ones saying it. That's what the travelers themselves tell us. Here in El Paso, we spoke to people coming from the interior of the U.S. Who got together with the complete strangers at gasoline stations, either in El Paso or in Juarez, Mexico, for safety, to travel in a impromptu caravan to make sure that they would not be the victims of crime, and if they were, there would be other people who would witness it with cell phones who would call for help. Here in these images, you can see the parking lot of a Mexican customs building where all the American residents or foreign residents are required to register their vehicles and declare any merchandise that they're bringing in excess of $500 to $1,000. This has to do with the tradition dating back to the 1950s when Mexican workers initially arrived in the U.S. and were estranged from their families. And during key holidays, such as Easter, such as Mother's Day, such as Christmas, they would go back to visit their relatives, bringing back gifts. Very often that gift was the vehicle itself. That has changed with Mexico becoming more strict as far as the permits and requiring travelers from the U.S. to post a bond on their vehicles. There you see a lot of merchandise. And we talked to a couple of people who spoke to us on the safety concerns. If we can play that, please.
He oído en otras personas, ¿verdad?, que han tenido problemas.
I've heard from other people who have had problems. It's mostly on the highway without tolls to Parral. They have had ugly incidents with people who come up to them on the highway. We use the toll road. It's always been very safe. Never had problems with anyone.
Pues que se oye que está feo, pero no sabemos cómo nos va a tocar ahora.
We hear things are ugly, but we don't know how we're going to fare. We came over last April. There was no problem getting the permit, and we had safe travels. We arrived without incident, and we got back safe, too. We hope it's the same way this year, and nothing bad happens to us on the road.
Rudy, these are long-standing concerns, and obviously we spoke to Mexican authorities. And I can tell you that in the state of Chihuahua, which borders West Texas and southern New Mexico, The state police of Chihuahua is deploying 300 additional officers just to monitor the highways that pass through the state from the U.S. that connect the state to the interior of Mexico. Their mission is to make sure that there's no criminals lurking about, and also to assist travelers. Sometimes your vehicle may overheat, or you might get a flat tire. These police officers are instructed to approach the traveler, offer help, and help them get a tow truck out there. In some cases, even a mechanic from an agency called the Angeles Verdes or Green Angels, which provides roadside assistance. In the neighboring state of Sonora, which borders Arizona, all 8,000 local, state, and federal uniformed police officers have been placed on alert so they can safeguard travelers and also assist travelers. We can tell you that last year we did not hear of any incident of violence involving a U.S. Resident visiting Mexico for Holy Week, but there's been instances in the past. I know my colleague Sandra Sanchez back in September of 2023, she wrote about a group of American visitors who crossed into from Roma to Miguel Alemán, Mexico, and they were the victims of a shooting, pretty much innocent bystanders caught in a cartel shootout. Some Americans were injured, and they had to be taken back to the U.S. But other than that, I think the people who travel to Mexico during this time of the year are, for the most part, savvy travelers. They know the lay of the land, and they observe some common sense rules, such as, like we mentioned, maybe driving in caravan with other vehicles, safety in numbers, and also keeping their cell phone real close to them in case they need to call for help in an instant.
Yeah, and some pretty good rules of the road, even on this side of the border, whenever you're traveling long distances. But especially important right now, these kinds of things to keep in mind safety-wise, is these ongoing travel warnings from the State Department here in the U.S. for places like Tamaulipas, for example, especially with what we witnessed just about a month ago with the killing of El Mencho, all those roadblocks popping up across the country, really.
Yes, so those recommendations should be followed whenever you cross the border. Keep your cell phone handy. Tell your relatives, either in Mexico or the U.S., where you are at specific times. And if you can, join a caravan. You can spot vehicles with Texas plates in a sea of Mexican vehicles with Mexican license plates going in the same direction. So that makes pretty good sense.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz talking about that pilgrimage that people make south of the border every Holy Week. Thanks so much.
Welcome.
All right, stay with us. When we come back, our Sandra Sanchez, South Texas correspondent, is going to join us to talk about a popular tourist attraction that could see a big portion of border wall going through it very, very soon. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. And also joining me, South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez, because a popular attraction that draws birding crowds from all across the world may soon have a piece of border wall going through it. Fill us in.
That's right. And it's actually not just birding, it's butterflies. And, you know, dovetailing on what Julian was talking about, people crossing to go to the beach. Well, actually, many people who come over into South Texas go to the National Butterfly Center, which is located in Mission, Texas. And in fact, I spoke to the president of the North American Butterfly Association, which they're based on the Northeast coast, but they run this facility down here. They said their numbers are skyrocketing lately, and actually a lot of local tourists and people coming from Mexico. And they've just had a huge uptick. They have had a record number of species of butterflies and birds this past winter, but he says he got a letter from U.S. Customs and Border Protection telling them that they want access to this 100-acre property because they're putting up 34 miles of border wall in the Rio Grande Valley. And here's a statement. They're saying the border wall areas near La Lomita Chapel and the National Butterfly Center in Mission will be constructed along the existing flood levee. This is news to everyone because in the past, these areas had been exempted by Congress. It had been written into the appropriations bill. But the money to build this border wall, new border wall now is coming from the big, beautiful bill, $46.5 billion appropriated. And as you see in this VO, Santa Ana, historic cemeteries, there's a map showing all that they plan to build. Eli Jackson Cemetery, La Lomita Chapel, the Butterfly Center, like I mentioned, Santa Ana, these had all been exempt. Well, they're not anymore because under the big, beautiful bill, there were no exemptions put in. So as this map shows, you know, they are looking at putting 150 miles of 250 miles, of river buoy. Basically, the entire Rio Grande Valley, there will be buoys in the Rio Grande. And then along it, they're going to put on the shore primary border wall, 30-foot tall steel bollard panels installed on top. They told me in a statement, quote, "This approach is intended to enhance both security and flood protection in the area." But that flood protection was kind of a new one on us. Originally, when they built the border wall, it wasn't designed the same, and it was for a flood protection for the region. But now they're saying that this smart wall, there's the statement, you know, they said it was awarded on March the 18th. And they aren't releasing how much the contract is. There have been some reports that it was over $1 billion, but they did confirm to me yesterday that they have got a contract. They are going to build, and they're plowing through the back half of the Butterfly Center. It's 100 acres, and there's only about 25 to 30 acres that are actively used. So this wall would really bisect the sanctuary. Jeffrey Glassberg of the North American Butterfly Center says he's not happy about it. And you know, I put together a video that you can watch on borderreport.com that ran some stations last night, this morning. It's on our website now. You know, we've been saying it for weeks that La Lomita Chapel and other areas felt like they were on the chopping block. Now, here's the interesting thing. We are still in negotiations for DHS fiscal year 2026 funding. Congressman Cuellar told me that he has put language that in the appropriations for 2026, that would mean that any money for the big, beautiful bill would have these exemptions that were previously exempt by Congress. But as you know, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are fighting it out about the DHS funding. So that is something he said he has mentioned. Negotiations are still ongoing.
So there is still a chance that these could be exempted in that language.
You know, I spoke to Dinah Baer. Now, she, for 25 years in Republican and Democratic administrations, ran the President's Council on Environmental Quality. So she said, yes, there's still hope. But then she laughed and said, but Congress is on Easter holiday and doesn't return until April 2nd.
Yeah, another week or so before they come back, yeah.
Right. So we don't know, what's going to happen there. I spoke to Father Roy Snipes.
And I was going to ask you, you've actually spoken with, at La Lomita, Father Roy Snipes. He actually took his vows in that church decades ago.
Almost 50 years ago. That's where he, to become a priest. And he holds Mass there at 5:30 every Friday morning. He says he gets 35 people. The little facility, which is a historic landmark, only holds 50 people. It's a very tiny chapel. It's of great significance to, people in the area, not just Catholics, is one of the founding structures here. And yes, he's very upset. In fact, Palm Sunday, his entire congregation, several thousand people, marched from their Our Lady of Guadalupe Church to La Lomita and had a day on the Rio Grande because he says it's a wonderful place to visit and it makes for a, quote, great day in the neighborhood.
And, you mentioned Congressman Henry Cuellar, who is trying to get that language put in as the debate continues on that DHS funding for 2026. You also spoke to him about something that you reported on Monday, and that is those border buoys going in the Rio Grande out towards Zapata County. Fill us in on that.
Right. Yeah, and I think we ran the video earlier this week, but just to recap, Zapata County commissioners last week pushed back on these river buoys that are to be put in. And they actually passed a resolution to oppose the buoys. This came after a study was done by I have to look it up, fluvial geomorphologist. That's basically a fancy name for a river specialist.
Yeah, water scientist, yeah.
Right. They did this study for the Rio Grande International Study Center, looking at the Rio Grande, how it would be affected in the Laredo area, which is only 50 miles west of Zapata. And so they took the findings to Zapata County commissioners, presented them, and they voted unanimously that we want to push back. We want to conduct a study here. So they allocated up to $25,000 for this study, which is kind of a big deal in a county that only has 14,000 residents, right? This is a county that went all Republican for Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Typically, these are county commissioners, politicians at the local level that we've actually heard talk about border security being an important aspect for them.
Absolutely. You know what? I'm impressed by this county. People there vote their mind. They don't stick to just a certain political group, right? So in the case of the river buoys, they don't want it. But like I mentioned, this county went overwhelmingly for Trump, but yet they went overwhelmingly for Cuellar, who is a Democrat. I did speak to Cuellar about this, and here's what he said about who he thinks should be in charge of studying the river.
The buoys, the International Boundary Water Commission should play a very important role on the analysis. The commissioner was here in my office, the new International Boundary Water Commission, and I did mention to him that he needs to play a role and not just say they're okay, because how you put these buoys could affect the flow of the water, the Rio Grande water flow. So they need to play a role in it. It's one of those things that you got to have agencies fulfill their responsibility, and the IBWRC has a responsibility for the river.
What's interesting is Congressman Cuellar, he's a ranking member of the House Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee. And so he helped to get millions of dollars for the IBWC. And here he's saying, do your job. I got you more money, so you need to show me something. And as far as the 56 miles of river buoys and 25 miles of primary new steel border wall that they want to put in Zapata, he's saying you need to study the river and see how it will really affect that.
The IBWC, something that's come up a lot on this program, whether it be talking border security, flooding, the drought, everything.
Well,
seems like they have their hands on a lot of things.
Right. They oversee the 1944 water treaty with Mexico, and Mexico, hasn't paid, only paid half what they owed us the last cycle. But again, it's this enforcement question. But he did help to give them a lot more money, and he says this agency needs to step up right now. So that may be the direction that they're pushing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your reporting today, Sandra. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Stay with us. Border Report is back in 2 minutes. And welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. A few more stories to tell you about. Bruce Springsteen was in a defiant but upbeat mood in Minneapolis as he launched his latest U.S. tour. Springsteen denounced the Trump administration Tuesday night for sending federal officers into the city over the winter. He also veiled a not-so-veiled salvo against the war in Iran as he opened with a thunderous version of the song War. Thousands of audience members held lit-up phones as Springsteen played his tribute to the city streets of Minneapolis. His tour ends May 27th in Washington, D.C., where he says he'll have a few choice words for the White House. He wrote the song. He said he honors the residents of that city for their courage in standing up against the federal immigration crackdown. Springsteen is launching his latest U.S. tour in Minneapolis. This weekend, he took part in the No Kings Day protest, where he performed a solo version of the song live during the national flagship No Kings rally at the state capitol in St. Paul. The New Jersey rocker released streets of Minneapolis in late January amid the nationwide outcry over the shooting deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy by federal officers. The music video for the song shows masked and armed agents in tactical gear, including the face of the operation, Greg Bovino, who was pulled out of Minneapolis by President Trump amid the backlash. The music video also highlights 5-year-old Liam Conejo Ramos. He's the little boy who was detained alongside his father. On the day of their detention, Liam was wearing a bunny hat and Spider-Man backpack, and he was surrounded by immigration officers. That is a photo that had stirred outrage around the world. Just really quick, wanted to remind you that you can always stay up to date on all things happening across the border on podcast form. You can listen to Border Report Live on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. For Julian Resendiz in El Paso and Sandra Sanchez right here in South Texas, my name's Rudy Mireles. We'll see you next time.